Hello, everybody, and welcome to Web and Beyond Live. I'm Ray Sidney Smith. I'm president of W3 Consulting and managing director of W3C Web Services, which provides affordable WordPress and other domain-related and web-related hosting services. And so welcome to Web and Beyond Live. This is my opportunity to have a conversation with you, small business owners out there in the world, and just have a conversation about how digital marketing works, how productivity technologies work, and how to really market and manage on the web and beyond in a modern age. And so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer them here on a Web and Beyond Live. If you're watching the live event, feel free to go ahead and leave a comment, and I will see them, hopefully, in the chat and be able to respond. Today, what I wanted to do was just cover a smattering of small kind of news items, and then to have and circle back to a topic that I think is important for us all to really be considering as we go through this kind of recovery and reopening process. A lot of parts of the country are reclosing, and I want to talk a little bit about some of those requirements for small business owners, what they should and shouldn't be doing, primarily from a marketing perspective. And then thinking about it from more of a productivity perspective, and I mean that on kind of a labor productivity perspective, business productivity perspective, as well as on an individual perspective as well, and see where we go from there. So first and foremost, and just kind of to let everybody know, the FCC recently agreed to make 988 the new number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now, this doesn't go into effect until July 16th, 2022, and so right now the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255 or 1-800-273-TALK, and so obviously, if people need that, feel free to share that number widely and have people use the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. But after July 16th, 2022, all telecommunications carriers in the United States will be required to forward the 988 phone calls to that existing hotline number. So I think that's going to be really fantastic. And I know that we frequently don't talk about mental health, especially in the small business entrepreneurship space, as well as in really small business ownership and staffing in small businesses, where one of the largest employers aggregate in the country, and we really need to pay attention to mental health. And so having something like that accessible, I don't know about you, but remembering 1-800-273-8255 is not going to be on the tip of my tongue and on top of mind when I'm having suicidal ideation or some other kind of major mental health issue. And so really good to have 988 come to the fore and really bringing parity to other public health crises. Okay, so just wanted to let everybody know that was available. And so shifting gears to just some other small news, Twitter recently was hacked. Unless you were a verified user, you probably are not going to be affected. And that verified users have the little blue check associated with their accounts. So unless you are in that category, you likely don't have a problem. But it does show a fundamental flaw in all of the various pieces of the puzzle. And so why this is important for you as a small business owner is to think about how your reputation can be ruined by just lack of security and privacy across the board, and why it's important for us all to really think about how our privacy, both personal and business data, is secure. It's just another reminder. So, Barack Obama, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, all of these huge names on Twitter, those accounts were hacked last week, and it was all to, of course, promote Bitcoin, the digital cryptocurrency. So, the reality is that people are out to make money, but in the process, it can really do damage to your brand. And so you need to do everything possible to be able to mitigate those damages. So making sure that you have multi-factor or two-factor authentication turned on all of your social media accounts. Yes, it will lower a little bit of convenience, but it will also increase the security of those accounts, including any accounts that may have access to it. So for example, I'm the Google Small Business Advisor for Productivity, and so a big fan of G Suite and all the various products in that Google Cloud environment. And that, of course, means that I have this single sign-on to many of my services. All I have to do is log in using that Google single sign-on feature. But that also means that I need to put in two-factor authentication and a strong password to protect myself such that if somebody tries to access all of my other services that are connected by Google, they have to actually have a physical key, a physical little key fob in order to be able to access it, that I've talked about on a past episode. So I'm protected in the sense that unless somebody has access in Google Cloud physically, they're not going to be able to access my account without that physical key. So you need to start thinking about how you're going to increase security across the board, especially when it comes to social media, because if anyone can take over your Facebook account or Facebook page or your Instagram account, Pinterest or otherwise, and start putting out messages that are counter to your business's values, that can be very detrimental to you. Okay, next up is just kind of considering the way in which the SARS-CoV-2, this novel coronavirus, and the COVID-19 pandemic that we're currently experiencing, we have a whole bunch of new things that are kind of happening. One thing is Amazon is innovating in what it's calling the Dash Cart and releasing that technology. And so this is actually a grocery cart, right? They're calling it the Dash Cart, and it has a bunch of sensors and cameras and even a weight scale. So when you put things on it, it can weigh it. And what this allows you to be able to do is to go into a grocery store environment and put items in your shopping cart, in your Dash Cart, and it will go ahead and do all the process of checking you out. So it'll, be connected to, I'm presuming, your Amazon account, and then it will go ahead and do the cash register stuff and just get you all checked out point of sale wise. This is really interesting, and potentially the future of at least major retail. I'm not sure how much this will be available in a small business environment, and I'm really curious as to what Amazon's going to be doing with these smart grocery carts, because it would be really brilliant if we could reduce the amount of in-person connection, right, in a retail environment through, say, having an iPad type device or a tablet on the shopping cart. You can actually talk to a clerk, so you're not isolating from an individual or a person, but now someone can be in a shielded environment, a safe space, while still having a personal connection with the shopper. And then the smart grocery cart, as items go into it, you're not only tracking and maintaining it for those purposes, you're mitigating potentially, hopefully, some loss prevention is being put into there that is reducing theft and other kinds of loss of inventory through illegal means. But at the same time, you are actually increasing labor productivity for the retail environment if people can be moving in and out of a, say, grocery store much faster without the need for having to worry about obviously being infected, but more importantly, the loss of time of standing in line and, all of the loss of personal productivity that is done when a clerk is spending time interacting in this very transactional way, as opposed to maybe on a tablet having a real conversation with that person, helping to facilitate their purchase, helping to upsell and cross-sell particular items that might be useful to that person, as opposed to actually being in this more elemental role of just scanning products and checking them out. So I see some benefit here, and I just hope that Amazon brings this smart grocery cart technology to small business and makes it available to small business owners, and seeing how that really works. I would love to see a hand cart as well, not just a rolling cart, but one maybe that can be carried, so that you can have smaller items, especially in smaller retail environments where you might want to have a smaller device and kind of carry that around as well. So just wanted to let everybody know that's out there, and to keep an eye. I know I will be keeping an eye on that technology myself. Okay. So that takes me along to the main kind of thrust of the topic. There are a couple of stories here that have come out that are around really the reopening and recovery process for us. In essence, there are many national chains that are coming out and requiring masks to be worn in order to enter the retail environment. And so CVS and Publix supermarkets and Walmart and many other stores, Target now, it says more than 80% of Target's 1,800 stores are requiring masks. This is according to ABC News. And so Starbucks, Best Buy, Kohl's, Kroger, I mean, really most of the major retail chains are going to be requiring masks to enter their retail environments. This probably means that you should follow suit. And again, this is, I mean, take away all of the other layers of political discussion around mask wearing. This is really about science and the medical research around this. And masks reduce the rate of infection for whatever reasons. And I don't particularly plan to be an epidemiologist in this lifetime or the next. And so my real goal is, from a marketing perspective, you need to be doing, as I said from the very get-go, you need to be doing everything possible to demonstrate to your buying audience, to your customers, your clients, and your potential customers, that you are doing everything to keep them safe. And that means mask wearing by your clerks, mask wearing being required by the other people who are coming into your store. This is going to create some potential harms, especially in environments where this is politically charged. And this shouldn't be a politically charged item, but this is just the reality we're living in. And so you do have to have some clear policies regarding either ejecting or denying service to people who are not wearing face masks. And that's going to have to be, you're going to have to decide what you do about those things when people come into your retail environment. So just be aware, though, that you do have, if you plan to have a stricter policy, that you do have in place all of these major retail chains who are doing this already. And so if that's the case, then you kind of can rest on big box stores policies as a mechanism for being able to say, listen, everyone else is doing this. We're just trying to stay in line with the general rules, notwithstanding what your state or local governments are not demanding of people. You can still say, listen, if you have to put on a face mask to enter Target or Walmart, you've got to wear a face mask in order to enter here. One thing that I would do as a practice is to have face masks, disposable face masks, available for people to take, preferably in individually wrapped units. So that it needs to be opened in order to be worn. I've seen some retail stores that have them kind of in their own little pull-out items, like napkin dispensers. I personally would not like that, because other people are touching those face masks, and therefore that can increase the rate of transmission if someone else who is infected is touching it. So the goal is to do as much as you can to be able to provide those pieces for people as they come into your retail environment. You want them to still have a great experience, right? And, the goal is for people to not have a poor experience when they come into your retail environment. And so your job is to be able to increase the experience as best as you can under the circumstances, right? And so I've also been seeing folks have little tissue boxes where you can pull a tissue out, using those either Torx or one of those, types of dispensers where the little napkin pops out. You pull the napkin, and the next one, of course, pops out after it, and that allows you to be able to pick up and touch items without having to physically touch them. So that you're able to just create a cleaner, safer environment. Honestly, I think that the silver lining out of all of this relating to the COVID-19 pandemic is that we'll all be more conscious about our sanitation and our personal hygiene and those kinds of things. Just generally, the flu kills, the influenza, the variants of influenza every year kills hundreds of thousands of people globally. And if we can just reduce that death just by a little bit, because we all are taking better care of our sanitary and personal hygiene needs, I think that is a positive on the other side of this. But providing these pieces for people to have when they walk into your retail environment just ups the ante and shows that you care about your customers, you care about safety, and for those folks who also want to patronize your store, they do have to abide by the rules of the store. Just like you're not allowed to, grab something off of a shelf and run out of the store. It's not, that's illegal. It's not acceptable in the culture. The same thing with regard to mask wearing and not touching objects that you don't need to touch. You need to make that a formal policy. You need to, if that's appropriate to your store, and you need to, of course, enforce it just like you would theft, right? You need to make sure that you are, managing your clerks and making sure they know how to respond to people, especially people who might become belligerent or otherwise violent in those scenarios, knowing how to call the right authorities and so on and so forth for doing those things, and just paying attention to the laws in your particular region, because this is going to, of course, become an issue of, what does your insurance carrier say? What does your current local governments say about these things, and whether or not you can, deny service and so on and so forth for this kind of stuff. So just pay attention to those pieces, and I think you'll be fine. Next up was a really interesting article I came across on Yahoo Finance, and it said that, in essence, basically at-home workers have basically not returned to their normal workplaces by and large. And so they did a Harris poll, and they conducted it between June 15th and June 17th, so just about a month ago. Well, more than a month ago, and they said 54 respondents say they're currently working from home because of the coronavirus, with 40% working from home full-time and 13% doing so part-time. And then they said 32% say they're working at their normal working place. So these must be essential workers or others with no change in their routine. And only 4% of those who began working from home because of the pandemic have returned to their normal workplaces, meaning that most people have stayed working at home through this whole situation. I think this is really kind of powerful news for us all to take kind of into account. And I think that this is going to just continue to perpetuate the power of the future of remote work. And we start seeing this in the small business startup space, and how just when we look at the number of startups and how they're developing, a lot of founders are seeing that they can do work remotely. And I came across this Visual Capitalist article in my web related meanderings, and it talked about how small business entrepreneurs are thinking about how their startups are going to be starting up now, and that maybe they're just going to start up remote first. They're not going to actually create dedicated offices and have dedicated teams in offices to begin with, and how that's really going to impact how startups start up. And so this is really going to be quite fascinating to me. I think that there are reasons for having people in person, having your team meet in person at times, and I think there are reasons for having teams not meet. I think that there are equity issues of social equity, and issues of kind of flattening some of the injustices that happen in a work environment by having a remote workforce. But at the same time, there are social components that are lost when you no longer get a chance to have water cooler discussion and that kind of thing. So just balancing those all out, I think, are very, very difficult. And I'm curious about your thoughts in terms of how you plan to either reopen or stay closed, and potentially just continue to work remotely. And if you are a startup entrepreneur, what your thoughts are in terms of whether or not you are going to start up in a remote first environment and stay that way subsequent to it. I also wanted to make note that as of right now, EIDL's, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, said it exhausted its funds. And as I understand it, the Congress is back in session, and they're going to be debating whether to do another round of funding. And there's lots of kind of discussions about whether or not those funds are actually helping the small businesses they need to be helping or not. And but just know that as far as I can read from the last several days, the federal funds have run out basically, and we're waiting for them to either increase that amount or do some other kind of recovery bill for small businesses. And with that, I wanted to talk about the NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business. They're an organization that's supposed to advocate on behalf of small businesses. And they issued a kind of a set of elements that they believe will help small businesses in this recovery process. And while I tend to disregard much of what the NFIB does, because they tend to be partisan, they tend to sway to a political side, the 5 elements they talk about here, I think, are useful to kind of think about in your own business, both in setting up for recovery, but also in marketing to your customers, especially if you're in the B2B space. And so if you're thinking B2B, how do you approach the potential challenges of selling in a B2B environment? These can be really useful. So think about this for your own business, but also think about this from a sales perspective. So the 5 elements they talk about are financial assistance, liability protections, tax relief, unemployment insurance reform, and regulatory relief. So if we think about that from that perspective, we need some short-term and long-term financial assistance for small businesses to kind of get through this hurdle. They've been forced into lockdown. We're now being forced into second and third lockdowns because the reopening processes have been inconsistent, and the cohesiveness between states have been lost and lacking, and therefore we have kind of spiking happening in different parts of the country at different times, and this is just going to become and stay a problem. Businesses are paying for that, having to shut down after kind of ramping back up to open up. There's loss of inventory, especially in food-based businesses and other kinds of inventory businesses where things spoil or things go out of date very quickly. Liability protections. How do you create liability protections for businesses that are, say, reopening and are worried about lawsuits? So the mask wearing, for example, is an issue. You're going to fear keeping your customers safe and maybe not open at all because you fear someone coming in and saying, I'm not going to wear a mask. You ask them to leave, and then they sue you for some kind of discriminatory practice, even though it's really about keeping your customers safe, right? So having some kind of liability protections built into whatever Congress or local, state and local governments do, I think it's really important to help in that regard. Tax relief, of course, you can't give financial assistance and then create a tax burden on the other side of that. And this was kind of the problem initially with the EIDLs and some of the other programs, was that there was kind of like, okay, well, the IRS is telling us that they're gonna basically not help us tax wise for the funds that were given as part of the PPP, and how can that be helpful? So, kind of fixing those pieces. Unemployment insurance is clearly an issue. If businesses need to furlough or terminate employees and then rehire them again after this whole situation, you need to create continuity of that relationship between the business and employees and staff. And then finally, regulatory relief. Sometimes we have this belief that regulation is always going to be useful and helpful on one level, or always going to be negative and detrimental on the other. And it's really a more nuanced perspective. And so we really need to then think, how are different regulations that we didn't think about beforehand, how are they affecting us on the kind of particulars of businesses in specific regions, right? So a restaurant or a food truck business is going to be affected very differently in Nashville, Tennessee than it is in New York City. We need to think very thoughtfully about how these regulatory issues really do affect them during those times, and where maybe more regulation is necessary in order to be able to actually enforce safety across the board. Public health should be paramount here, and then we can deal with the economic issues after the fact if we can deal with the public health issue up front. And I've believed this from the very beginning. If we value life, and if we put life before money, then we have a better chance of dealing with this economically. If we do not do that, then the reopening process becomes more difficult because fear sets in, and people don't buy fear as much as they buy life, sex, all kinds of other cute babies, puppies, and kittens. People buy for those reasons. They do not usually buy in abundance out of fear. And so, other than toilet paper, and that's really not what most of us are selling. And so we really need to think thoughtfully about how we deal with some of these issues. So from a sales perspective, I then flip this and think, okay, if I'm selling B2B, which traditionally, many of us are, and some of you are B2C, some of you are B2C, B2B, and so on and so forth. But the point is that for those of you who are selling B2B, think about each of these 5 pieces as being points of objection as you come across any sales conversation, and how are you capable of helping. Are you going to have some kind of payment plan that helps to mitigate the upfront cost of your services? Are you going to be able to build in some guarantees that help with liability issues? For example, you're disclaiming any obligation to sue them for contracting the coronavirus in your consulting practice, things of that nature. Just, they may seem not the biggest deal to you. You may even think, well, why would I ever sue a client because I caught, the coronavirus. But that might be a fare for them. And so just be mindful of that and make sure that you put those things up front so that they're aware that you're going to be doing them and that you're not going to perpetuate a lawsuit against them because of something that they don't really have control over, barring, right and good mitigations. If they're going to be thoughtless about putting you in harm's way, then you should have some kind of, remuneration, some kind of ability to be made whole there. But the reality is that you can put in some protection for them and put that up front in your sales copy to make sure they know, hey, I'm not going to be thoughtlessly and frivolously sued because you come into contact with the coronavirus and get infected. Obviously, tax issues, figuring out how the tax burden and tax issues are going to be affecting your businesses, and not necessarily that you're going to not collect taxes where necessary, those kinds of things, but just saying that you're flexible, that in the absence of tax, you're not going to continue to put a burden on them, or whatever can be done in those cases. Same thing with unemployment insurance, and just dealing with staffing issues. That maybe your sales copy says something to the effect of how during this period you'll be able to still satisfy the contract requirements if that's possible. Without the staff being there, how are you going to make this more efficient, notwithstanding their labor productivity issues that may be coming across the board? Are you going to be able to do this remotely and really satisfy the contract remotely without having to be in person and keeping the staff safe? Those kinds of things. And then finally, any regulatory issues that you might be able to help with. Recently I was working on a contract, and the contractor basically said, well, we'll do all of the permitting. We'll take care of all of those issues with regard to the state and county permits that are necessary to make this happen. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's just a huge relief that I didn't have to deal with that burden, knowing that it's a changing and dynamic environment. There's new permits that need to be gotten. There are permits that are being fairly relaxed, or permits that seemingly I can't get at all because nobody is in the office that issues those permits. So it seems like you're just sending email and leaving voicemail into a black hole. So having this opportunity for someone else to kind of take on that responsibility can be really useful in this environment. So I just wanted to point that out so you can kind of get an idea about how you might be thinking about this, and the NFIB has been doing a pretty interesting job of thinking through all of the various points of helping with the recovery. Okay, so that was my content for today for Web and Beyond Live, and we've come to the end of our time together for this week. If you enjoyed the live stream, feel free to leave the thumbs up, use the little thumbs up icon. That does help us make new small business friends. And so thank you for doing that. If you have a question, feel free to leave a comment. If you want, you can send me a message on Twitter by going to @W3 Consulting and leaving me a DM. And you can join us every Monday live here at 11 a.m. Eastern. And unless otherwise noted on social media and otherwise, we're usually here at 11 a.m. Eastern. Also note that we have a new domain. So I registered webandbeyondlive.com. And so if you go to that domain now, it will redirect you to the most current up-to-date live stream that will be broadcasting each week. So after this live stream, webandbeyondlive.com will redirect to now the next week's live stream for you to be able to, you can set the reminder or put it in your calendar or otherwise. So hopefully that helps to clean it up and it makes it easier for people to access. But webandbeyondlive.com is the new domain. Thanks so much for spending this Web and Beyond Live with me. Again, I'm Ray Sidney Smith with W3 Consulting and W3C Web Services. Have a great week ahead marketing your small business on the web and beyond. Take care, everybody.